This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so I think the intention for today is to just kind of get everybody up and running with Atlas 3, teach some of the more complicated, potentially editing techniques, make sure that we're never going to lose any data, potentially show how to enter a couple THP units, and get into the nuances of Atlas 3. Lots of good functionality in here. Obviously, this program is basically built for SPI4 registers. Alpine uses it heavily throughout. I mean, every day of many people's lives is spent 8 hours a day on this program editing. We keep all, what is it now, 1.6 million acres of ownership as tight as possible with GIS down to the vertice. I was just talking to one of our GIS guys yesterday, and he's running around fixing, technically it would be called an overlap on one of our layers where there's actually not an overlap at all, but there's just a vertice from one feature that's on one shared border and not on the other, and he's deleting vertices back. So really well-designed piece of software for editing geographic features. There is a training portion of the manual. So if you go to the help, I guess, Glenn, maybe we should see, do we want everybody to be following along here? Do they need to have Atlas open?
Follow along, you get a lot more out of it.
So we should probably check and see if everybody at least has the current version of Atlas running on their computer.
Yeah, we can show them how to do that. I mean, for the people who are watching it all on the big screen, you know, it's going to be like watching a TV show. You're going to remember some of it, but it's not the same as if you're doing it, but it's still okay.
Okay, well, I guess I'll just assume that those that
Let's
have
show them how to check for updates.
Sure. Okay. So if you have the program open, obviously just go to this help drop down menu and you can press this button here, check for updates. You can also always see what version of Atlas you're using at the top. Obviously it's Atlas version 3 is the main version. Then we have a couple other version numbers. The last number is always the build number that we're referring to. So right now we're on build 37. If you use the check for update tool, it'll just tell you straight away if you're up to date, you're up to date. If not, it will tell you that you need to update, and you can just press this button down here to install the update.
I want to make a note. So you see on the sidebar there on the right, it's kind of, I don't know, lavender. No, I don't know what color it is. Some color of blue. Anyway, generally when you see something there, it's instructions and information to you. So if you're getting in here and you're clicking, okay, yeah, do this, you know, let's go, and something doesn't work, you might want to read the instructions because there's a possibility that you're not doing something correctly. So the instructions there on the right, especially like things like exporting or importing, you know, files, GPX type stuff, you know, all of that. On the right, we have instructions, or at least some
PDF builder. Yeah, I think when these instructions are there, it's usually because I know that there's going to be something that could be confusing, and so I'm trying to mitigate confusion. So yeah, they're generally there because I can anticipate that it might be confusing.
And I mean,
unfortunately,
I've had a lot of people that I've ended up helping, and I'm like, did you read those things there? I mean, it kind of explains what we're talking about, and not to say we don't like talking to people or you guys, but you can kind of help yourself probably quicker than you can dial somebody up on the phone, just by being aware of what's on the right.
Right. So that's always good. This will automatically check too if you haven't used Atlas for a little while and you come back in and we have a couple new releases, it will just prompt you. As soon as you start the program, it'll prompt you to do an update. And we always recommend it because we're still actively developing and fixing bugs all the time.
And we generally don't put a release out until we know it's an improvement. And even if we did put something out there, you can always roll back using the same thing. But anyway.
Yeah, so the help menu actually has a lot of good stuff in it. I mean, report issue sends an issue straight to me and the development team. If you need something fixed or you are stuck, you can just fill this out pretty quickly and send it to us. You do have to put your email in here, and then you can even put a image if you take a screenshot of what you're stuck with, and you can even send us a full zip version of your geo. So if you're really stuck, you can just send a geo and just say, hey, my geo's broken, please help, and most likely
Yeah, before you exit out of here, I mean, you're just typing junk in there, but
uh-huh.
the username, you would put your name. If the bug, if it's repeatable, you would check the box. If it's not, just leave it blank. Under title, that's kind of a title for the problem you're having. Contact email is obvious. And then the big box is where you would write a little sentence or two or narrative, how much ever you want. You can upload an image. You can, like Chris said, if you check the button down there, it's going to send us a copy of your geo. So anyway, it's good to fill it all out so we know who you are. And when we call you on the phone, we're not calling you Polly Sue.
Release notes, you can always check the release notes. Manual, come back to. Standardized attributes is just a quick link to the Excel spreadsheet that helps you to know what all of those reserved Atlas 3 fields are meant for. So for every different layer, we have a designated attribute type for each of these fields that are standardized. Every shapefile that you ever bring into Atlas will get a link label C1 through 6 and N1 through 3. So in the case of THPs, obviously that's the most important layer. Well, we refer to it as SPI THP RIS, but it's a real handy little trick. If you ever wonder what's supposed to be in somewhere, you can just check it real quick from the drop down.
And I would say one thing that's really important with your THP units is to fill those things out as completely as possible. If we don't have the information, then we're going to have to go look it up, meaning we're going to have to go find your THP map from CalTrees and pluck it off there, and the chance for us to make a mistake, you know, it's probably less than 10%, but errors would happen. I mean, it's better for you to properly attribute your THP units in Atlas. I mean, you're kind of putting stuff in there anyway to make your map, but it's a good idea to make sure you're putting it in the right fields. Because if they're not in the right fields, let's just say you put unit number in, I don't know, C5 or something like that. Well, we're going to have to move that around, you know, and if you put THP name in C3, we're going to have to do kind of the data shuffle and get it corrected. So just pop in here, make sure you're lining everything up, you know, where it's supposed to be. And that will save time down the pipe and ultimately save money because we pay Alpine to fix stuff. So if we get it right, then we don't have to pay them.
Right, and it's just, I mean, obviously we, like you just said, we get paid for it, but it does streamline the process so much, and all of our programs are basically just databases. So anything that gets messed up with the data, if you go to a filter, you're trying to search for something, it's not there, it just turns into a time waster. But, okay, cool. So let's get into the manual. Just want to point out that there's a lot of questions that can be answered in here too. I think I've recorded like 30 some odd videos in here on all kinds of different topics. You can learn how to use display layer thematic. You can search for things in here if you don't know how to edit. I don't know, let's see what edit geographic brings up. Edit geographic vertex delete. So how do I do an edit geographic vertex delete? Also, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you know, what is it? How does it work? There's topic. I'm not asking you. I'm just pretending I had the question.
Right. No, I mean, it's useful. I think me and Glenn both spent some time on this manual. So there's links in here explaining commonality central to what Atlas is. We'll cover that in this presentation for sure. But there is let me minimize this a little bit. This SPI training is kind of partially what we're working on right now with this video. We'll break this up and and probably put it in here for folks in the future. But there's some lessons in here. That's how Alpine does all our training. So some of this start training here stuff is interesting. In fact, we might all come here depending on what we do with this training, but there's some data in here. Actually, it's just a practicer forester geo that from like 2021. It's a typical annual update geo. So we can kind of all share the same data if we need to. So that'll get more robust as time goes on. All right, so I guess let's just get into loading a geo and we can go through the layout of Atlas. I'm gonna do file geo use here just to get a geo loaded up. And oops, there's a main difference between the geos in Atlas 3 versus the geos in Atlas SE. I guess that's not as relevant to this discussion, but in Atlas 3, the .geo3 file has all of the layer settings and label settings that you would be used to in a map file. And I guess we need to go over both of those, but a map file, in my opinion, which can be found here, file map file, is basically just a settings file. So the geo, when you go file geo save, I'll just do save as, you're saving this .geo3 file extension. And it's just like the MXD in ArcMap. It's just a project file, really. And you can use this to load your project and all of the layers that are there and all of the settings that apply to that geo. Now, if you have a geo open and you have other settings that you want to load, you can use a map file. And that could be useful because with a map file, let me just show what one of these has in it. If I even have any map files. It will exchange, the map file will save your map extent, so where you're located on the map, all of the layer settings, so all the colors, patterns, and visibility caps that you've saved. Layer tree grouping, so all the grouping, I can't move this right now, but all of the grouping if you have folders for all of your different layers, and then label settings. Obviously, there's some expressions and things that you might not want to lose for all the labels that you have set for different layers. So if you save a map file, and then you can do what this tool is here, map file partial. What that means is you can apply any of these settings to a geo3 or just a geo.
Note what is not present. Page layout is not present. We do that with map documents. One of the big complaints of Atlas SE when we went there from DOS, and probably only Steve Emershai would remember this because he was a DOS user, I think. You used to be able to put stuff anywhere you wanted on the map, and you had pretty much ultimate freedom. And then with Atlas SE, we basically said, well, all maps are pretty much going to be landscape. We will let you do a portrait map. It's going to look pretty funny, but we really clamped down on what you could do. Effectively, all you could do is turn something on or turn something off. And now we've kind of given you a lot of freedom back. And none of that map composition gets saved in a map file. So if you're thinking, oh, I need to load up that, you know, I'll call it a map, but that document that I wanted to print out for silviculture map 3 of 4, you don't load a map file to do that. You're going to load a print layout document.
What? Print layout document. Hey, we have a question for you.
Yes.
Go ahead, Joe. Oh, I guess you answered it. Yeah, we were wondering about the map file. I guess I have another question though. And you mentioned that a geo is a project file. Would that be similar to the PRJ file, or is that the projection file when it comes to art?
That's a projection file.
Okay, all right. Not a project. I always thought it was project file.
Oh yeah,
Right.
.prj. Yeah, that's just the project projection file. It's used by the library to just tell the
Go ahead
map
and,
where to
Which is
project
kind of important because if you don't send that to somebody who's going to use your file, they end up in the Indian Ocean.
typically or off the African coast.
show them file map file default.
Okay. So under file map file default, what it's really doing is this is a easy button to get a default map file, which you're going to partial. So if you started off and you were loading up a bunch of layers, if you were to just build an empty geo in here, you won't have any, none of this kind of map composition will be set yet. So if you do map file default, it will open to a designated file path in your Atlas install file folder. And you can pick one of these SPI default map files. So if I was to click on that, it automatically is asking you to
Just
do
don't
a
pick
partial. Right,
Yeah,
so
because
map
you
view wouldn't really make
map
sense.
view.
You're most likely in a different part of ownership, but
Aren't
you
you?
might want to grab the layer settings and the layer tree grouping and the
Yeah.
label settings. For now, that's probably not necessary, but it's a good way to just kind of quickly get your map looking
Well, you can
like
do
something
it.
that you can
Just
use.
show them what it looks like. Just do those
Okay.
two things. Yeah.
Yeah.
So more the typical, blue color for SPI and the roads, kind of the way we like them. Lakes are on. It's just it's kind of like a quick start, so you don't have to go through all the layer settings setup. The one that said Forester's Geo, that's kind of the typical Alpine delivered map file that you would get if you opened the map file that Alpine sent. Huh. Didn't seem to do it.
Didn't want to change district. Probably don't have district in most of our geos because we just call it parcel. I'm not sure. Maybe we do that. Maybe we don't. Huh. Interesting. Let's check yours again. File map file. Maybe they got overwritten for some reason.
Yeah, I don't know. Try it again. So do the
SPI default.
I do the Forester's one.
They're the same exact size. It looks like somebody copied the wrong one, maybe. I'll have to check that later. Anyway, let's see here. Lost all my layer settings. Well, we just don't need district on. Otherwise, this looks right?
Yeah.
There's just no labels on regen, but that's probably fine. Okay. So that's file and geo. So in terms of the rest of the layout of Atlas, probably most importantly on the screen right now anyway is the layer tree. And with the layer tree, you are able to adjust the drop priority. So see if I can find an example of this. Not a lot of stuff overlapping here. Okay, here we go. So this is a road that's on top of regen. So you can see in the layer tree that road is here and regen is here. So road is on top of regen. So when I say drop priority, I mean if you drop road down below, oh, there must be a transparency on there. It will just adjust that. So the road is now technically below the regen layer. There's a transparency on there though, so you can't quite see it. But it is important in terms of getting the map set up in a way that's actually usable. You want to make sure that you have most of your line features typically end up on top of all of your polygon features, and then you can mess with.
You do have a little problem. It's not much of a problem, but you can see, I think the streams are going over the roads, but maybe they're not. It looks like they are, but they're not.
I mean, they're all dashes, so I can't tell.
Hard to tell. Never mind.
That's okay. I think we're all on the same page there.
Go ahead and show them, sort by layer name and then try to move something. This is a common problem we get a call about.
Right. So if you click here, if you click here, it is going to sort all of those layers, but that's just exactly a sorting for the layer tree, and it disables the drop priority that I was just explaining. So you're not going to be able to adjust these anymore because you have a sorting on. So you have to clear sorting first, which means you have to right click here and click this clear sorting. And so that brings it back to the default view where it's using the draw priority, which it can be handy.
Yeah, the other thing that might happen is if you build a geo from scratch, in the layer tree, go ahead and do right click and pick column chooser. You're going to have probably everything turned on, which makes for a real cluttered environment. So in here, like you can pick and choose what you want to show in the layer tree. You know, that's pretty cluttered. Chris generally runs with layer name and count.
Yeah.
I'm lazier. I just run with layer name.
Okay, we had a question.
Yep.
Yes.
Go ahead, somebody ask it.
What exactly are you sorting in the layer tree?
The name of the layers.
Just
It's-
like sort by alphabetical?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Atlas 2. All right.
You can also
And is that-
search.
Okay, is that just so you can find things?
Yeah.
Because search too. Because you want to be able to know those layers in draw order eventually, but especially if you want to move them around. Okay, well, that's helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the sorting, I don't personally ever use sorting because I like to see, it makes a lot more sense for me to see it in draw priority terms, especially when, you know, dealing with the geos that we deal with, we have 20, 30 layers. So for me, it's a lot easier to just try to set up my geos similarly. So if I'm looking for regen, I know that it's always in my primary folder, and I usually have it about halfway down because I want everything else on top of it. So it's kind of nice to just, I mean, it is useful in some cases. What I've seen what we kind of refer to as like power users doing is actually, and this is probably beyond the scope of an initial training, but you can use something here called the filter editor. And you can actually filter by any of those columns. Now we turned off the columns, but technically those columns still exist. So you can come in here and use this visibility option. And then you could set here to only show, what you're doing here is making a filter for this layer tree to only show something. And so I'm saying I want to show only layers where the visibility equals, let's just do always on for now. So if I apply that, it's only showing these two layers. Maybe this is too complex, but I'll show you why, just because it is kind of interesting. So now I have a filter on. My layer tree is much simpler to view because it's really limited the scope of it. But if I click on township, double click, now I'm in the layer settings, I can see that this layer style setting is set to always on. So that's what I just made a filter on, which can be useful if you have 30 layers and you're only using 15 for the foreseeable future and you just want to declutter what's going on over here. Now I can turn this off and on just with this button here. So really, just to wrap this up, what you would really probably want to do in this case is actually make a multiple layer statement here and say visibility is always on or automatic. And sorry, I got to do an or statement. Okay. And so what you're seeing is this meadow layer is set to automatic because it's going to go off as you zoom out. This will turn off at 1,500 feet to an inch scale. So as I come out here, now you see that a lot of things are turning off. So probably not going to be quizzed on that, so to speak, but it is kind of a nice little tool, and it's actually relevant to talk about because browse here, which shows you all the feature information, uses all of those same tools for making filters. And we'll probably come back to that a little bit later, but that's why I said it's an advanced user thing, but it's totally relevant because you will learn how to use filters. I think they're really powerful and pretty easy to use.
And you can think of filters if you're at all familiar with ArcGIS, which we allude to it occasionally. It's similar to a definition query if you know what one of those is.
Sure.
And if none of what I just said makes any sense to you, don't worry about it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Obviously up at the top is where all of your toolbars are. You can do a lot of map controls up here, panning, single selection, different selection
Show them how
types.
they can save their layout and how, oh, what if my toolbars get all screwed up? How can I get those fixed?
Right. So basically, most of the programs that we're developing now are using these dockable windows, which allows you to customize all of these views. So if you like to have browse open, you want to see all your feature info, you can just grab it, move it. You can put it on another screen. You can pin it down here to the bottom. You can pin it over here to the side. You have all of this flexibility. And it's kind of nice because in a lot of cases, you do want to customize it and get it all set up, but it's also easy to sort of maybe make it too complicated. And so if you do get to a place where it's like, man, how did I get here? You can go up to this window drop down and you have a couple options. If you like it, if you like the way that it's set up, you can save this custom layout, and that has to do with all of these toolbars. If you like your toolbar down here, now, or you can turn some things off. This is just a right click. If you don't want to see the editor toolbar, you can right click to turn that off. So once you get all of these set up the way that you like, you can save. You can just call this like sample 1. And if you want to load that, you do the restore custom layout. I have another one in here. Let's see what the first one looks like. It's kind of a goofy one. I have the map scale down here for some reason. You can delete them. Obviously, you need to do maintenance on those. Or you can reset, which is a pretty common one if you do kind of get things a little bit jumbled up. You can reset the window layout, and it will put all those dockable windows over into the original position. And you can also reset the toolbar layout. So I have this is a toolbar, it's kind of floating around. So if you reset the toolbar layout, it'll clean all of these toolbars back up and get you back to where you were at the beginning.
And if you close one of those dockable windows, it just goes down in the lower left corner.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, I think I know users that set this layer tree, they don't use the layer tree at all. I mean, you can technically change layers from the right click context menu here. You can turn layers on from the right click context menu right here. And you can also select layers from here. This is kind of a quick reference. It's also from Atlas SE. This is kind of nice here because if you right click and wherever you right click at that moment, it will tell you all the other layers that are in that area. So if you're missing something and you know that you should be able to see, well, land count class in this instance, let's click on that. So that layer now just turned right back on. You can right click if you want to turn it off. You just hold shift and click left click and just turn it back off, which is nice. And we actually added something else recently. So if you hold shift before you right click, it will give you all of the options for the ortho drop down right here. And it does use that space, which is getting more useful over time because we're getting a lot of satellite imagery that Glenn's flying and getting these kind of updates for fires mid-year, and we have hill shades in certain areas, most of ownership now, but if it's not there, this is kind of a nice way to just see like what's actually available, and you just click it to turn it on. Probably, or did I do that?
You probably have to click it.
Oh, I got it, yeah. So that'll turn it on, shift right click, just click it again to turn it off. So can be pretty quick way to do things. There's also the way that I have this layer set up, or this dockable window set up right now, is just with this auto hide feature. So that can be kind of nice. You just hover over it and it will pop back out.
Turn on the contours, and I think is it shift click, or I can't remember how
yeah, contours.
Elevation.
It's control. Yeah, you just hold
You
control.
just hold control and mouse over it. You don't have to click anywhere. Just, put your cursor over it.
You can quickly see what elevation that is there.
So if you're trying to figure out what the elevations are on your units for sowing, or if you're trying to figure out, you know, what elevation is this critter I found or plant or whatever it is, that's an easy way to get it from the contour lines.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and hopefully you've all, well, I don't know, I think I have it set up. Click the drop down for contours. There should be 3 choices. We should have 1 meter, 10 meter, and 30 meter. The 30 meter is based on a 30 meter grid spacing, 10 meter on a 10 meter grid spacing, and 1 meter based on a 1 meter grid spacing. But all the contours that you would encounter and load from there, they're all in feet, and the 1 meters are going to have the most detail because they're based on the LiDAR. But if we haven't adjusted the streams, you could run into a situation where, you know, maybe the streams don't fit the contours. So just want you to be aware of that.
And in case anybody hasn't already set that stuff up, the configure program is for all of the program settings. And so if your contours are not showing the correct data, or your hillshades are not showing any data, you would just come in here. This is where you can type in your username, which helps with tracking edits. You can do all of your units, choose what coordinate reference system you want to use, default area and distance units. These are all used in the on-the-fly calculations that Atlas does. So if I were to change this, well, right now, if I click on this feature here, you can see the area is in acres, and that's set up from configure program. So if you want to always be looking at square miles, you could do that if you wanted to. I think most people go with acres. Same thing with distant there. Precision is how many decimal places you're going to use. So in most cases, in browse is where you're going to see this. So if I go EAB, you can see any place where I have decimal places visible here, area, they're all to the 3rd decimal place, and that's all set through this units area. So if you only want to see 2, you can do that. If you're much more interested, you can see 6 or 10 or whatever. Selection, go ahead.
Sorry about that. With regard to contours, Glenn, maybe you can help me. Is there a setting that we should use operationally so that we don't bog our system down, or just because sometimes the resolution and the data processing is too slow? So is there one you recommend?
Well, you're going to get the most detail from the 1 meter resolution contours, but if you zoom in, like Chris, if you zoom in on these streams, they obviously have not been rectified on the map. You can tell they're not fitting down in the shaded relief. I mean, see how it's not in the channel? They're not fitting badly, but
that one is.
Yeah, you can just see that they're off. I don't think Chris has the 10 meters, but if we use the 10 meters, it would probably fit better. You kind of have to make a choice. I guess this is a decent place to talk about backup and things like that.
Yeah, was your question referring to loading your contours from your local machine versus loading those off of the network?
Well, that's a very good question. I didn't ask that, but we need an answer for that.
Well, that's kind of what I was taking it as. There's a performance gain in having the contours be on your local machine. I wouldn't really recommend anybody using the 30 meter contours unless you wanted contours. Well, I just don't know that you would use them. They're old, and you know, we could do a comparison and you would just see they're not very precise, which and size wise they're not any less in size than the other layers that we have developed. But if you're running the contours off of the server, they have to come from the server and load onto your machine. the other thing is if the server's down, you won't have any contours. So the alternative to that is you can put them on your local machine if you have space. If you don't have space, then that's not going to be a viable option. So I don't know what Weaverville looks like and how far, you know, how much the streams have been adjusted, whether all of the streams have been corrected to the LiDAR yet or not. We kind of have Alpine working on that when they're not doing other things more important. And so they're kind of making progress always on that. But, you know, you want your contours to map when you turn them, you want them to match when you turn a map into CAL FIRE. You want the streams to be in the contours, not on the side of the contours, because otherwise you might get some questions.
Okay, that makes sense, Glenn. Do we have LiDAR covering the whole district, or is the hillshade a reflection of something else, some other data source?
Shade is a reflection of what we have coverage for. Can you pull up what we have coverage for, Chris?
I don't think we got it.
I think we might. I don't think he's made it available yet.
Oh, really?
Sorry, I'm lost in my own computer here. Ownership. Weaverville, right? Yeah, we should be covered up there.
Awesome. We like it. We like it.
I'll double
I
check
feel
them,
bad for that Bernie.
but
Yeah, we've got it pretty, I mean,
They don't have
about all of ownership is covered. Just these areas out here didn't quite get covered.
They don't even have any contour intervals for those guys. It's so flat.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter, does it? Yours actually, this is the Weaverville district, right? Am I having a brain
Yeah.
issue here? Yeah. This is the second most accurate, maybe, yeah, it's even better than 1 meter in some cases there. It's about a 1.5 feet accuracy through most of Weaverville. So
Camino, I think, is our best.
1
foot.
oh, it's all oh yeah. This should be, I think Alt Tahoe has like 1 foot. Yeah. Or, yeah. Anyway, it should be covered up there. We can get that distributed if you don't have it already. So you could see to load this geo, I didn't use a map file because I'm just picking up where I left off. Every time you close Atlas, it saves your geo automatically. So if you're just coming back to work and picking up where you left off, all you really need to do is go file geo and use whichever one you used last. So you can use keystrokes for that, which would be Alt FG1. I'm just going to go back to this geo because that's where we just were.
Yeah, we don't really have current anymore. If you want to get back to where you were, file Geo1, FG1, that's how you do it.
Right. Configure program, anything else noteworthy here? Contours, setting up your contours, you would just pick here to go to your file path. Ortho, click here to go to your file path. You can set the visibility cap on them there. If you do have kind of slowness issues with loading, it's probably good to keep those down at 5,000 or 10,000. You don't want to, it's a lot of data to pull in some cases. So if you zoom out to 80,000 feet to an inch, and you're trying to load all the orthos, that's potentially in upwards of like 2 gigs worth of data or something that you're trying to download to load that. So that's why a visibility cap is important. A lot of this stuff is just kind of as you get into it. Oh yeah, backups. So because of data loss, especially in early beta testing with Atlas 3, I had the programmers build this automatic backups thing as we were having some crashes a couple years ago more frequently, and now it's just a good thing to practice anyway. So if you come in and set this up, it really doesn't cost anything. So you can just come in here and just check this box to use automatic backups. And really the most important thing here is to use, I would just recommend using an interval. You can do it every couple hours. I have mine set for every hour to do a backup. And the first backup time, it's not going to actually run a backup at 12 a.m. It only runs a backup when the program is running. So in a lot of cases for Alpine users, we have a lunch, we have lunch on the hour, so it would make more sense to actually have your backups run at like 5 minutes till. That way the program's actually still open, or it'll back up 5 minutes before the end of the day, something like that.
Show them where the backups go.
Okay. So whenever you have a geo built, you have a file structure. I think yours is called
A3 data.
A3 data. I have mine called something else. These are all technically project folders, or a lot of people just refer to them as geo folders. And as you come through here, let's see, I'll just go to this one. This is what the standard setup for any project folder would look like. You have your backups folder, your map file default location. So if you go file, map file, save, they're always going to go here to these map files. If you have print documents set up, which we'll cover later, they're saved in here. Print layout templates also saved in here. Or wait, print layout, test one, PLD. Oh, I see. These are both associated with documents. We'll cover that later. Temp is not really used. It's just a storage location if you need it. And then trash is for recently deleted layers. It's how you can do edit layer, delete, undo, or edit geographic, delete, undo. So that's just a storage location for some of your data if you ever lose it. And here's backups. So the automatic backup, if you have that set, it's going to override that. You're not going to have 8 backups a day or 10 backups a day. You'll just have one backup every hour if that's the interval you set up. And it's just a copy of your current geo. So if you wanted to keep a series of backups for a week, maybe at the end of every day, you could come in to your auto backup folder and just zip that. You could send that to a compressed zip folder and just rename it. You could rename that to 114.22, like end of day or something like that.
The other thing that you guys have, and I could work with you on this, but you should have a backup icon, and we could look to see what that thing actually does. It's the little Apple icon. We might make a copy of it and make it more custom to you. So if you're working on the network, there's advantages to that. One advantage is that gets backed up. The disadvantage is if the server goes down or the network goes down, you won't be able to use the information that's stored at that location. Also, just because you have something on your machine, it's going to load a little faster than if you're loading it or using it across the network. Not a lot, but a little bit. So there's a slight performance advantage to having your files locally. But if you have your files locally, you need to take backup into your own hands. The strategy Chris just reviewed is one way of doing that, but it doesn't do incremental backups. So we would need to set up a way for you to back up your geo stuff if you're going to have your geos locally on your machine, we would set up a way so that those can back up to the network, probably to your P drive, so that if something went wrong with your hard drive or your computer or something like that, you could restore those from the network location. So there's pros and cons either way, but regardless, I would say if you're working on the network, I mean, it wouldn't be bad for you to make a copy and have it put it back on your computer, just so, in case you needed something in a pinch, you would have it if the network went down. But
yeah, I guess it's up to the user, but I would recommend definitely working off of your local drive with your geos saved on your computer. Probably the same thing with the contours, just for speed.
yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah.